All right, we'll go ahead and start. They're 40 seconds late, we'll be okay. I'm first going to read off roll here just to see if everybody made it. Danielle Baginski, okay. And of course, I have trouble remembering my kids' names, okay? And then with masks, it's going to be even worse. So if I can't remember your name, that's just what happens when you get old. Okay. So Daniel, is Daniel Berg? Over here, right? Okay. Joy. All right. And I was looking through, and the vast majority of you have either been in 105 or 402 or 415, so we've seen each other before. Jaden Bazard, okay, who has not been in my classes before, so, all right. Tyler, all right. Teresa Ernst. What?
That might be me. E-N-S.
Oh, E-N-S, yes. I didn't bring my reading glasses. See, because what happens is if you start using reading glasses, then your eyes start to get used to it and they get lazy. So my eye doctor just said, you know, do as best you can. Also, you'll notice that as you get to that point, if what you do is like you can't read something, if what you do is you take your finger and make a little hole like this and put it up like that, you can read it. So once you get to that point, and you might think that's weird, but it's because it blocks out the ambient light. And so, you know, if you ever see me going like that, that's why. Okay, Sabrina. Andrew Giovanti, okay. Michael Hegstad. Joseph. Kaiser. Josiah. Nathaniel Jones, I think he's not here yet, but okay. Lucia, is that right? Lucia, okay. Robert Lowry, okay. Conrad. Isabella. Melody McDonald. Emma Nover, okay. Micah. Alexander Reed. Ethan. By the way, I did use your paper for the class, just to show him off a little bit here. Jack Shelley. Parker. So Ryan's sick. Grace. Stephanie Walker. And Aiden. All right. Okay, I'm going to hand out here a law and economics syllabus. So if you could just sort of pass these around. Just pass them down around there. One thing you'll see when on the syllabus is there's one textbook. It is the Law and Economics book by Culler and Olin. What I did was I've got a free PDF version that the University of California has put out. So it is, for you, you won't have to buy the book. If you want to, I have 2 students from the last time that I taught this that wanted to sell theirs used, so I may auction those off to see if people want to do that. But the PDF is in the Wolfram folder. Now, I sent you all out an email, so you should look for that, which allows you a link to the Wolfram folder in Box. So you guys, a lot of you have done it before, we used to do the T drive, and then we went to box, but some of you have done this before already. So when you get in the Wolfram folder, you'll see there's Econ 105 and et cetera, but there's an Econ 472 folder. And in that, that folder is broken down by section based on the readings. And then there's a PDF of the book itself. So that was how I was presuming you guys would probably use it. So you won't have to buy a book for the course. All right. So any questions on that? You guys can figure out how to do that? Okay. All right. So anyway, I sent the link out yesterday, so you should be able to access that Wolfram folder in Box. You guys all know how to use Box? Okay. All right. Any questions so far on what we'll do? Okay. Now, do we have any extras of the thing floating around? Can you pass that up to me? All right. All right. Thank you very much. There will be sort of standard for you guys that have had already. 2 midterms, a final, and a paper. The paper is 8 to 10 pages on any topic that you want that deals with law and economics. People usually do very well on this because you just pick a topic that you want and you're interested in, and you'll find that 8 to 10 pages will move pretty quickly. Nobody has a problem getting to 8 to 10. They usually have a problem getting over that. All right, like I said, it will be based on anything that you want to do with law and economics. So if you want to do something on, let's say, incarceration rates of blacks, okay? They tend to be very much higher than they are for whites. And so you might try to say, well, gee, here's what the rates look like. Here's an explanation for why it might happen. You might look at whether we should, let's say, should you have drug laws? Should you have should it be a crime to use crystallized methamphetamine or not? Right? If you do that, then there's going to be cost to that, right? You got to have police run around and catch people, so there's a cost to that. And then you got to go through the legal process, and there's a cost to that, et cetera. Or should you just say, hey, not a crime at all, right? Or you might look at whether something ought to be criminal law or whether it ought to be civil law, right? So let's say we decide to make something a crime, well then people will go to jail or whatever afterwards, or should you make it that they have to pay a fine if they do it, right? So there's all sorts of things that you can think about when you do your paper. So the paper is worth 10% of the grade. Turn it in. I'm usually a little bit loose on that, but I'd like to have it due the day of the final. If you get to the day of the final and you really think it would be a lot better if you had an extra day, I'm usually pretty good about, okay, if it's better, I'd rather see a better paper than one that's rushed. So anyway, but day of the final ought to be the target. The midterms are scheduled. The first midterm is going to be on Monday, October 5th, all right? And those of you who've had me before know that they will, in the upper division classes, I have them in blue books, so you'll bring a blue book to class and you'll answer the essay questions there. And it's normally, for your class, it'll probably be 5 multiple choice, 5 true false, and 4 essay questions. And you'll have the 50 minutes to do it. So you should have sort of thought through what the questions are going to be. Again, lots of you have had me before. I'm not going to bring a question out of the blue. Okay, it's going to be You know, if we talked about, you know, certain characteristics of criminal law, you know, if I tell you there's 4 characteristics of it or something like that, that's the type of question that you're going to get, right? So you won't be surprised with the questions on it. The Wednesday, I know you're not going to like this, but the Wednesday before break, we will not have class, okay? So, you know, unfortunately, you'll have an extra, and I don't know if you have other classes on Wednesday, but you may have an extra time for the break. We will, you know, as we've done before, we may have a makeup evening class later on in the semester. Oftentimes, if I have to give a lecture somewhere for the college, and it depends on where we are in the schedule, but I may have an evening class just to make up of it. There will be review sessions before each of the 2 midterms and before the final, okay? So you get 3 extra classes to start with, so to make sure you're getting your money's worth. But so for each of the midterms, we'll have a little review session, about same as a class period, and those review sessions will be the Saturday before the Saturday before the exam. So the first review session Saturday, October 3rd. The second will be Saturday, November 7th, and the third one will be Saturday, December 5th. Okay. Office hours. I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 till noon, so not in the office then. So we'll have office hours in like 1 to 2 or so, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and office hours in the morning, I believe at 9:30, and what did I say, 9 to 11 on Tuesday, Thursday. Now, I'm in the office usually much more than that. So if I'm in the office, I'll have the door open. You can just come by. You don't have to, you know, if you want to make an appointment, you can, and that's fine. But if you are walking by and you know see I'm in the office, just stop in. Right? It's not like I'm confined to those hours for my office hours. But I will, you know, unless something comes up, I will be there at those times. Again, the readings are, as you look in the, if you look here in the syllabus, the readings are basically extra things that you may want to expand your knowledge with, or if when you're doing your paper, you may want to look into that. I've posted some articles in the Wolfram folder under the different sections. Some of these you might pull yourself. Some of them are things like James Buchanan's book, Limits of Liberty, right? It's just sort of a famous book. And you know, if you're interested, you might want to, you know, take a look at that. All right. So the required readings are what's in the textbook, but these other things are there to help you out. Or if again, when you go to write your paper, you may, you know, want to take a look at these things that are listed here. And again, I also have readings that are posted in the Wolfram folder. All right. Any questions on procedure at all? All right. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about law and economics and where we are on that, and you know why you might want to study law and economics. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use economic theory to look at the law. Right? If you go to law school, you may learn different things about the law, but you might also want to know, why did we make the law that way, or maybe this law ought to be changed because it's inefficient. So we're going to be looking at it from an economic standpoint. Now, What do we learn about economics? What we learn about economics is that people respond to incentives, right? And in predictable ways. So what did you learn? When the price of something goes up, people are probably going to buy less of it, right? You drew a demand curve that was downward sloping. But you also drew a supply curve that was upward sloping that said, you know what? If the price goes up, what am I going to do? I'm going to do something as long as the added benefit is bigger than the added cost. If the marginal benefit to me of producing is now greater, then I'm likely to produce more, right? And we assume that marginal costs increase as your income rises. Or excuse me, marginal costs increase as your output goes up. That's one of the assumptions, right? I mean, if you just sort of thought about it, if marginal costs always fell, then you could produce an infinite amount of something, right? And the marginal cost would go to zero. So at some point, that marginal cost curve's got to start upward sloping. So when you drew a supply curve in Econ 202, what did you do? You drew a supply curve was actually that part of the marginal cost curve that was upward sloping. All right. So so we're going to look at just two major things. We're going to look at the effect of laws. All right. So what if you make the law, what's going to happen? And when you think about it, you also might want to know, what if we're trying to accomplish something? What should the law look like? Right? What should the law look like if you're going to accomplish something? The reason I don't do PowerPoints is because if I write things out, it sort of slows things down a little bit, right? And so I'm not just flashing up the PowerPoint and reading it back to you. So I said, geez, why does this guy never use PowerPoints? He just this is what we started out with, right? Blackboard, this is Blackboard, right? The only time I'm going to, by the way, the only time I'm going to use Blackboard is when I use blackmail. And that's where I can email all you folks through Blackboard. So that's how you got the link to the, that's how I gave you the link to the Wolfram folder. All right. So, for example, let's think about minimum wage. So let's think about a little bit about minimum wage. Because there are some people think we ought to have a $15 an hour minimum wage, right? I mean, if you look at people that are running for president of the United States, especially when you're looking at the Democratic, when the Democrats hadn't chosen Mr. Biden yet, there are a bunch of people that wanted a $15 an hour minimum wage. Bernie Sanders, for example. So what's the effect of that? What if we did a minimum wage? What would happen? Well, if we think back to Econ 202, right? I've got a wage here, a number of people here, and I got a demand for labor that's here, and I got a supply of labor that's upward sloping. And if this is the equilibrium wage, and I try to set if the minimum wage is less than equilibrium, doesn't matter, right? If I said I could be running for president right now on the, who knows what ticket, the Progressive Party ticket or something, and I could say, I want to have a $3 an hour minimum wage, right? Well, that would be fine, right? Because the equilibrium wage is probably bigger than $3. So it wouldn't have any effect. But if the equilibrium wage is less than what you want as the minimum, why would you be offering that as your platform if it weren't, right? If you said, nobody's running for president saying they want a $3 an hour minimum wage, right? They want a minimum wage that's greater than what is existing right now. So if that's the case, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to have a demand for labor that's here. We're going to have a supply of labor that's there, and What do we call these people that are looking for a job and can't find one? Yeah, they're unemployed, right? So a minimum wage is going to cause unemployment. It's just a matter of how much unemployment is it going to cause, right? So when I'm determining what the law ought to be, I want the law to be a minimum wage in America. I want there to be a law that says the minimum wage is $15 an hour. Then you must be saying, I want to cause unemployment. And I think that notice that everybody between here, this is the equilibrium, right? These people, they're all better off, right? Because they're getting $15 an hour. So, and they were getting, let's say, $10 an hour. So they're better off. So you must be saying, if you want a $15 an hour minimum wage, you must be saying, I think the cost to the people of losing their jobs is less than the benefit to these people that are gaining these jobs, right? And so one of the things that we talked about in Econ 415 was we talked about Pareto optimality, and we'll talk more about that in here. That is, are you at a state where you can't make one person better off without making another person worse off? Here, if I impose a minimum wage, I'm going to make some people worse off, some people better off. So if you're out there arguing for a $15 an hour minimum wage, what must you be doing? You must be saying, I know, if you've had Econ 202 anyway, or 105, you must be saying, I know this is going to cause unemployment, but I think the benefits to the people that have a higher wage are greater than the cost of the people that are going to lose their jobs. Notice whenever they interview somebody, I don't know if you've ever watched when they're interviewing people on this stuff, they interview somebody, they don't say, you know what, I'm going to lose my job, but I think it's going to be a lot better for the people who don't, right? They all think they're not going to lose their job, right? But we know some people are going to lose their job. The only way that somebody might not lose their job would be if the demand for labor looked like that, right? If the demand for labor were perfectly inelastic. Now, it wouldn't have to be perfectly inelastic over the whole range, right? You could have a demand for labor that, you know, looked like that. So that if what happens is I move the wage from here to here, the number of people hired will be the same, but you'll induce more people to go out and look for jobs, so unemployment would still happen, right? It would just be new people that the opportunity cost of their time is now less than what the minimum wage is. So you'd still have some people coming into the labor market, so you should observe some unemployment, right? But it wouldn't be people who had lost their jobs, it would be people that people that would be coming into the labor force. So if I'm looking at whether we should have a minimum wage or not, we need to know what's going to happen if we do it, right? So when you're going to have a law, you need to know what's going to happen if we make that law. That's what law and economics is about. It is about, or one of the things it's about is trying to make it so that we understand what's going to happen with the law. Now, what happens if we tax, just to give you another example, suppose that we do is we put a tax some consumer good. Okay? So we go out there and we say, we're going to put a tax on cars that get less than 15 miles, or let's say less than 50 miles a gallon. Or what if we give a tax credit to somebody that buys an electric vehicle? Okay? Or what if we give a tax credit to somebody that buys their electricity if it's solar powered, right? So what you need to do is, if you're going to have such a law, what do you need to know? You need to know what's going to happen if I tax a good. So if I put a tax on cigarettes, right? There's been discussion about in Oregon about raising the tax on cigarettes, okay? So what is that, right? Econ 402, right? Public finance. One of the things that we looked at in public finance is what happens when you tax, tax goods. What happens if you have a tax on income? What happens if you have a corporate profits tax? So one of the things that we do in public finance is we work through different types of taxes and what the economic effect of it is. So if I were to tax a consumer good, right? So let's say it's cigarettes, right? And so we got dollars up here and we got quantity down here. Well, we got a demand for cigarettes and we got a supply of cigarettes. Okay, and we got the equilibrium. Okay, then what happens? Well, it depends on, when we're going to draw that picture, doesn't it? It depends on, is the tax on the consumer? Does the consumer pay the tax? Or is the tax on the producer? Now, again, those of you who had 402, we talked a little bit about retail sales tax. And in Michigan, what does the law say? Most of you don't know. Most of you think that when you walk in to the grocery store, or you walk into a store and let's say you go to McDonald's and you buy a hamburger at McDonald's. What happens? They charge you the $1 for the hamburger, right? And then they charge you 6% sales tax, right? And you pay $1.06 for the hamburger. That's really not the way the law works. You think that you're paying the sales tax. If you were to read the law is a tax on making retail sales in the state of Michigan, okay? And so the tax is really on the retailer. What the law does is the law allows the retailer to put the price as if the tax isn't there. But the actual tax is collected from the retailer. It's not a tax on you guys, it's a tax on the retailer. But by putting the law that says I can now I can't post, McDonald's can't say, okay, advertise McDonald's hamburgers are $1 and then charge you $1.06 when you get to the window. They can charge you the $1 and then they can add the 6 cents, and so they can list it as less than the $1.06. Okay? So how we make the law, will affect what people's observations are, what their effects are, and whether people know the law or not. Now, again, in public choice, what do you learn about? You learn about people irrationally ignorant, right? There's a marginal cost to you of learning about what the law is, and there's a marginal benefit to you of learning about what the law is. And if the marginal benefit to you is near zero, then you're not going to learn about it if the marginal cost to you is anything. So when you, and again from Econ 415, when you vote in an election, what's the probability that you know anything at all about their positions on anything? Probably none of you know who's running in your state representative race. Now, maybe some of you do because you happen to know them or you worked on the campaign and you're really interested, right? So you're really interested, just like people are, really interested in the NBA playoffs, even though they're not playing a whole season and I haven't been watching it all, but my son's really interested in it, right? And you're not going to affect the outcome of the NBA playoffs by knowing, what people's, average scoring and all that other stuff is, okay? But, so some people are going to know a lot about what people's, what their positions are and what they want the law to be, but a lot of people may not. So, but if we look at the tax on consumer goods, if we put the tax on the demander, right? So for them, now what happens is, you think about it a little bit like that, that's what the demand curve is now going to look like, because now oh, wait a second, put it the other way. Yes, put it the other way. Nobody raised their hand, right? Because now what's going to happen is they've got to pay the tax. You know, this will be the tax, right? So they'll have to pay the tax for it. So what's going to happen when they pay the price plus the tax? That's going to hit their demand curve here. So what should happen? Well, we ought to see a reduction in the quantity of the goods sold, right? And you can do the same thing on the supply side. And so what happens is the supplier is going to get less than what the price is. So if you were to put the tax on the supplier, and you just sort of thought about it a little bit, you got a demand curve here and a supply curve there. Now what's going to happen if we have PE and QE? Now what's going to happen is the supplier is going to have to pay the tax. So they're not going to get that price. They're going to get the price minus the tax. And so what's going to happen is that supply curve is now going to be, we're going to have a supply curve which is going to be this way, and we'll get a reduction in the amount that's going to be produced because this is their regular supply curve, and now what's going to happen, we're going to get a drop in the we're going to get a drop in the price for the supplier, and they're going to supply less. They're going to supply less than they otherwise would have, right? They're going to supply less than they otherwise would have because they're not going to get the full price. They're going to get that price minus something else. So instead of getting $1 for the McDonald's hamburger, if they've got to pay the 6%, they're going to get 94 cents for the hamburger. So they're going to supply less than they otherwise would have because they're not getting the full price of it. So just the point is that again, if we'll do more of that in detail in Econ 402, but the point is that if I impose a tax, if that's part of the law, then what's going to happen is I'm going to affect behavior. And I should sort of know what's going to happen if I do that. So again, if you are in law school, but you've never had any economics, then it'll be difficult for you to analyze, should there be a tax, should there be a retail sales tax, or should we have in fact, I just got an email from somebody asking me if I thought that a retail sales tax for the state of Ohio is better than a tax on income. Okay? Well, I got to sort of, if I were to answer him, I said, hey, you need to look at this book. Rather than try and go through it myself, I gave him a public finance textbook to take a look at. Because what do you need to know? You really need to know what's going to happen if I put a retail sales tax on, what's going to happen if I put an income tax on. And so if you're going to law school and you're looking at this sort of thing, you really need to know what that effect will be. Renewable energy requirements, right? State of California has legislation that they have to have a I forget the exact percentage, but they have to have a very large percentage of their energy being produced by renewable resources, okay? Well, you got to think through, how's that going to work? If I were to say, oh my gosh, we've got global warming, okay? If you were to make an economic argument that we ought to require that we have so much by solar and wind power, in fact, if you follow me on Twitter, right, you would know that I just wrote a little piece in the Detroit News last week saying that the solar power credit and the wind power credits that are expiring ought not be renewed, okay? And I made an economic argument about that. Why, what was the purpose of those credits to start with? Where are we now, et cetera. But if you were to make an argument for we should have a requirement that cars get so many miles per gallon, which we do, right? If we make a requirement that we have to have so much solar power or so much wind power, what must we be using to explain why we do that? There must be something going on that we're now using the law to account for. And if I said it has to do with global warming, what would be, anybody thinking through? How about negative externalities, right? We must be saying that when you are driving your car, what are you doing? You're putting carbon into the atmosphere. And then what's happening with the carbon in the atmosphere? It's causing something to do with the atmosphere so that it retains the heat. And when the heat gets retained, then temperatures rise. And if temperatures rise, then the ice caps melt and the oceans rise and the water gets warmer and we have more hurricanes. Right? Anybody from Louisiana in here? Right? Well, I don't know if you're following this, but there's a Category 3 hurricane about to hit in the Houston, New Orleans area, and it's going to have 15 feet of storm surge. Okay? So if you're driving your car, you're considering the marginal benefit to you versus the marginal cost to you. You're not considering the marginal cost to everybody else that's not being picked up in the price system, right? Because that marginal cost is not in the price of the gasoline. And it's not in, when you go to buy the car, let's say a car that gets 30 miles per gallon costs more to produce than a car that gets 10 miles per the gallon. You're not considering that cost that you're imposing on everybody else when you're deciding how many miles per gallon you can get with your car, right? So when we go to think through what these renewable energy requirements are, you need to think through that. What's the next? If you're going to be in a law and economics class and you're going to explain why we need to have a law that has renewable energy requirements, that says so much of the energy in the state of California has to be produced by wind and solar, then that could be an economic explanation of why you'd want to do that law, right? But you also start to think about, well, what about if it's intermittent? And then what happens is you have rolling blackouts, which they had in California a while back. I'm from California, and now they've got rolling blackouts now. You have to sort of think through what are the economic consequences of that piece, right? So do I have to have standby nuclear power for the time period that the sun isn't shining or whatever? People get home 6 o'clock, right? And the sun's not shining, and they all turn on their air conditioning. Then what happens, right? The grid doesn't have enough power, and so they have to start having rolling blackouts in order to do that. But maybe you ought to price it differently, so that if you're going to use electricity at 6 o'clock, it's going to cost you 3 times as much as if you use the electricity at 9 o'clock or at 3 o'clock or whatever. Then what you might do is you run your washing machine at 3 o'clock instead of at 6 o'clock, etc. And as an economist, you'd be looking at, okay, if we're going to have energy requirements because there's negative externalities, then we need to maybe think about how we're going to price things and what the economic effects are going to be. So economics is very much embedded in how the and when we look at the law. And the last thing is just think about health insurance. How many in here have ever heard of Obamacare, right? Or the Affordable Care Act, right? All right. There's a law about that, right? And notice, what do we have in COVID? Millions of people lost their jobs, right? What happens if we've set the system up so that your health insurance depends on your having a job, right? So in my Econ 105 class, I they always bring this up. That is, when you go out and get a job, you're going to ask for benefits, right? You expect to have benefits. You don't say, gee, do I get my car insurance paid for? Right? Do you pay my renter's insurance? Do you pay my fire insurance? What do you expect them to pay? Your health insurance. Why is that? Because it came down from the mountain. It was the 11th commandment, thou shalt provide health insurance for your employees, right? No, there must be some explanation. I mean, doesn't it seem crazy that your health insurance is tied to your job, right? Why in the world do we have that? Okay, and so what happens is, what happens if you have diabetes, right? And then you get laid off. Then you got to go buy health insurance somewhere, right? And you got to go buy health insurance. Now, I'm an insurance company, and I go, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to insure against diabetes. You already got it, right? So now that's going to create a problem, isn't it? So what do we have to do? That when you look through the Affordable Care Act, what does it do? It requires everybody, it says, I can't deny somebody for a pre-existing condition. Well, what if life insurance worked that way? Okay, I wait till Aunt Betsy dies, and then I go, I buy $1 million life insurance policy on her, right? And the life insurance company says, wait, she's already dead. I said, that's a pre-existing condition. Come on, you have to sell it to me. Well, if that happened, then everybody would wait, just like in the health insurance, everybody would wait till they got sick and then they'd buy insurance. So what do we got to do? We got to have a law that says you have to buy insurance, right? And so so this 2,700-page Affordable Care Act, right, is all tied into the fact that your health insurance is tied to your job. You don't lose your life insurance as long as you keep making your premiums. You don't lose your car insurance as long as you're making premiums when you lose your job, but you lose your health insurance. Okay? And so today, when we have millions of people that have lost their jobs because of COVID, now we got to think through, okay, what are we going to do about that? Right? I mean, that's going to be a big problem. And so we need to sort of think through when we go to do something. And again, if you just remember Econ 105, I could tell the whole story about it. Started out with how we ended up with this was wage and price controls in World War II. That's how you ended up with the Affordable Care Act at the end. But that was the beginning of why your health insurance is tied to your job. All right. So think about all the things that are affected by what the law is that you do. What kind of light bulbs you buy, right? You can't buy certain kind of light bulbs anymore, right? You have to buy these incandescent light bulbs or light bulbs that have funny light to them and stuff like that, right? You can't just buy a regular old light bulb. Or how many gallons your toilet can flush, right? There's laws about that. And so when we sort of think through this, there's all sorts of behavior that how many people you're going to hire, all these things are affected by what the law is. And so that's why we, again, why take a class in law and economics? If you're in grad school, or excuse me, you're in law school and you've never had a class in economics, you might not be thinking through, okay, what happens when we make it so that you have to have incandescent light bulbs? What's going to happen there? I mean, all sorts of things are going to happen, right? It's going to affect the demand and supply for labor in the different industries as well. All these sorts of things. What does Mises talk about in liberalism, right? Talks about unintended consequences, doesn't he? Right? Sort of think back to 105, or if you've had, Professor Steele probably talked about it. What did Mises say? He says, you know what? He says, once the government intervenes, it tends to create unintended consequences when it intervenes in the market. And then those unintended consequences, what happens? Politically, people ask for government intervention to deal with those unintended consequences. But that creates more unintended consequences until eventually what happens is you get more and more sort of central planning. And so when you're advising Congressman Wahlberg, that's our congressman from Michigan 7th, when you're advising Congressman Wahlberg on what the law ought to be or whether we should change the law, you need to be able to explain to him so that he can explain to the rest of the, of the Congress, here's what's going to happen if we pass this law, or here's why we should be voting for this law or why we should be voting against this law. That requires you to sort of understand what the consequences of that law would be. Now, all this is pretty recent. That economics is being incorporated into the study of the law. If we really, one of the first articles on this in 1960, right, was Ronald Coase. Ronald Coase's book in his paper in the Journal of Law and Economics in 1960 was called The Problem of Social Cost. Now, again, some of you had Econ 402, right? And when we were talking about negative externalities, one of the things that we noted was that if transactions costs are low, right, then people will bargain over things. He, used the example of what happens if your cows are getting into the cornfield next to you, right? Well, you might make a bargain, if you're the person that owns the corn, and we'll talk more about the Coase theorem later on, but just sort of as a heads up, if you are the person that's got the corn, you might go to the guy that's got the cows and say, or lady that's got the cows, and say, hey, guess what? I'll pay to build a fence, right? Or I'll give you $50 if you will make it sure that your cows don't get into my cornfield, right? So if transactions costs are sufficiently low, then these problems can get solved, which tells you that maybe when you write the law, you ought to be making it so that transactions cost or the ability to bargain is low. Can I do something in the law that makes it easier for you and I to reach an agreement? And what should we do about agreements? So one of the sections that we're going to read, or one of the sections here, is contract law. What should contract law look like? Who should be responsible for certain things? Also, Guido Calabresi also wrote a paper in the Yale Law Journal in 1961. So when you look at the textbook in Chapter 1, there's a footnote number 2 in Chapter 1, and that has a reference to those two articles. All right. So what we'll do for next time is we're basically in the introduction part, and we will be moving forward into probably into chapter 2, so you might want to might look through chapters 1 and 2 in the textbook. Again, it's posted in Wolfram folder, so you all should have it. So if you have any questions, send me an email or something. If you have trouble, has anybody tried to link into the Wolfram folder already? Okay, all right. So who's been successful in getting into the Wolfram folder? Okay, so some people have been successful. Okay, all right. So if you have a problem, talk to one of your friends. They'll figure it out. All right. Yeah, yeah.
I'm also interested in buying the physical textbook.
Okay, all right. I'll bring those. I'll bring the textbooks, and I'll try to get a hold of Ingrid de Groot is one of them, and I'll try to get a hold of her. And she just left them because at the end of the semester, and said, "Hey, I got this extra book." And there's one other, so I'll get a hold of her and find that out.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm just supposed to say hi from everyone at the Econ Center.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
They told me to say hi.
Okay, great, great. So that's where you were this summer?
Yeah, working for the newspaper they were on.
Okay, great.